To the House.
Speaker.
I call the Honourable Nikki Kaye.
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to speak on this piece of legislation. At the outset, can I just acknowledge the committee, the chair of the committee, Sarah Dowie, our spokesperson in Tertiary Matters, the Honourable Paul Goldsmith, but all of the members that have worked very hard on this bill. This is an education bill that has come before this House that this side is supporting, and I know there will be people listening who often think the role of the opposition is only to criticise. Well, actually, there's a lot of work that happens in this House whereby members do work together, and we work together to improve legislation to ensure that more young people get very good quality opportunities. And that's what this bill is about. There's 4 or 5 key aspects to this bill that National will be supporting, and at the heart of it is ensuring that we have better quality in terms of our tertiary education, but also our international education sector, but also that we ensure that our reputation on the world stage, but also internally, is very sound and solid. The export industry in terms of education is worth, I understand, about $4.28 billion to this country. So it's a very important industry, and it is at threat. We have to acknowledge in this House that the opposition, through some of their immigration policies, election commitments that they made, are a major threat to that industry. And so what this bill does is it also acknowledges the fact that we spend over $4 billion per year, about $1 billion of that is on very generous student support, but that there do need to be changes. And the first area of change is about greater flexibility in terms of funding. And there was pretty unanimous agreement in this area in terms of the committee. But the next area is about improving the accountability of some of these providers. There's a massive number of providers in this space, and we know that this builds on the work of the last National Government to ensure that where we may have fraud or where we may have people getting false credits, that we build on the work and the provisions within this bill in this area. There was a bit of a disagreement in terms of having a level playing field around equal treatment of providers. We are very surprised that Labor's ideological opposition at committee has removed the clause in the bill that would have enabled public and private providers of tertiary education to be treated equally. We also do want to acknowledge that while we are supporting this bill, it's very important to understand the wider education picture. We have seen extreme ideology rear its head from the other side with the scrapping of partnership schools, with the scrapping of national standards, with the changes around cohort entry, with a fees-free policy which is worth $2.8 billion that isn't targeted, but that this is a bill whereby we can work together, whether it's in the issues of compliance, whether it's in greater flexibility of funding. And then the final area that I want to talk about is very dear to my heart as a spokesperson that gets in and out of schools, but also as a Member of Parliament for Auckland Central. And some of the most heartbreaking constituency cases that I've had have been people for which they've come to New Zealand. They may have been international students. They may have been international students that might be 20, but they also may be younger in schools, and they've had some bad incident. Now, sometimes we know that incident is not necessarily about them, it's things that have happened to them, but sometimes it is an issue of conduct. And this is where I think the committee did great work. I want to acknowledge the members opposite. We delved very deeply into these issues of ensuring that our code of conduct that was recently brought into train really is meaningful. But what it does, and what this bill does, and it's very important, is it contains a proposal to amend the law to enable state and state-integrated schools to manage international student misconduct outside of school, including through the use of stand-down, suspension, exclusion and expulsions. And this comes on the back of a court ruling. So I want to finish by saying, look, this is a bill that is supported by this side of the House. It is in the context of much wider education reforms that our opposition do not support because they're ideological, they haven't targeted funding properly, they've not helped vulnerable children when it comes to partnership schools. But we do support this bill because we think ultimately it's going to lift the quality of tertiary education that is provided. It's going to lead to less compliance. We think it's going to enable greater flexibility in terms of funding, and it's going to help some of our most vulnerable students, particularly where there may be a misconduct issue, where it may involve international students. So I have no hesitation in supporting this bill to the House.
I call the Honourable Christopher